It's February 1837, and the great Russian poet Alexander Pushkin is dying. His wife Natalya, or Natasha as he affectionately called her, is by his side.
She was called in at the end, and he told her not to feel guilty, which must have made things quite tearful. Almost his last words were, it isn't your fault, it wasn't your fault, don't worry.
I shall not wholly die. These sacred songs, although my dust decay, will hold my spirit, and I'll be known as long as any poet remains alive under the moon.
Pushkin was unquestionably the greatest poet writing in Russia.
Elaine Feinstein is one of Pushkin's biographers. The poet had been shot in a duel with a Frenchman, but he didn't die immediately, and great efforts were made to save his life.
The Tsar sent his doctor, which was a mark of honour, to see if anything could be done, the best surgery of the time. But he looked and he said there's nothing that can be done. And he gave a letter from the Tsar to Pushkin, which told him not to worry about his family and said that he would look after them. Until he knew he was going to go quite soon, he tried to keep Natasha out. And she was then very, very miserable. She did love him in her way, you see.
Pushkin's wife, Natalya, was many years younger than him. She was a terrible flirt and a great favourite at the court of Tsar Nicholas I.
Natalya was generally counted the most beautiful young girl in Russia, and certainly at the court. She had no interest in poetry at all. She would come in and find Pushkin with his literary friends talking, and therefore annoyingly indifferent to her, or however much he loved her. What she did like was to dress up and go to balls, and that was a kind of schism in their relationship, bridged by Pushkin's general understanding that she was young and he couldn't expect her to love him as passionately as he loved her. He would have loved to go back to his estate, but the Tsar wouldn't let him because he liked to have Natalya as a presence at his balls.
And it was at one of those balls that Pushkin's young wife first met a Frenchman, Georges Charles Dantes.
He's a very slippery character. He's a handsome, dashing military officer, one of the guards regiments of the Tsar. He immediately recognised that Natalya was a very beautiful woman and pursued her.
But Dantes had a secret.
He left France at the time of the French Revolution of 1830 and came to Russia, actually travelling in the carriage of the Dutch ambassador von Heckeren. Von Heckeren was much older than he was and a closet homosexual. Dantes was quite poor and very good-looking indeed. And von Heckeren loved him and immediately set about adopting him as a son and introduced him into Russian society.
What was the motivation for Dantes? Why did he flirt with Pushkin's wife?
There are many reasons possible for this, and I don't think anybody knows. Partly, of course, it was his manner, and he was very vain, and he liked to dance with the most beautiful woman at the court. But also, he was the homosexual lover of Heckeren, and he wanted that kept secret. What could be a better trail obscura than to devote all his attention to one particular woman? And I imagine he did find her attractive.
In November 1836, Pushkin received an anonymous letter.
The supreme commanders and knights of the most serene order of cuckolds, gathered in the Grand Chapel under the presidency of the venerable Grand Master of the Order, have unanimously named Mr. Alexander Pushkin coadjutor to the Grand Master of the Order of Cuckolds and historiographer of the Order.
A cuckold is someone whose partner betrays them sexually. No one has ever discovered who that letter came from. There's no obvious motive. Hecarim can't be responsible because he came round and pleaded with Pushkin not to have a duel. Dantes didn't want a duel, so who?
Whoever sent it, the effect was immediate. Pushkin demanded a duel with Dantes. But when Dantes announced he was going to marry Natalya's sister Ekaterina, things calmed down. However, even after the marriage, Dantes continued to flirt openly with Pushkin's wife. Pushkin again challenged him to a duel.
Nobody could have refused to accept the challenge, having received it. He was so insulting, and Dantes, who was a military man and couldn't possibly allow his honour or his courage to be questioned, accepted. There was no question but that Pushkin wanted to kill Dantes. Dantes didn't want to kill Pushkin because he would be in trouble. He knew that if he did. He was a foreigner. He was in a very good guards regiment. You really weren't supposed to kill people duelling.
On a cold February morning, Pushkin and Dantes met on the outskirts of Moscow. Dantes shot Pushkin in the abdomen. Pushkin returned fire, but only managed to hit one of Dantes' buttons.
Dantes only intended to give him a leg wound, but he was put off by this ferocious, rather short, ferocious man coming up with the gun directed very clearly at his chest. And so he shot badly. The shot didn't enter the leg, it entered the abdomen.
Could the duel have been avoided?
Nobody could live with that extent of aggravation. There are some aggravations that really did come from Natasha because she was very extravagant, she loved dressing up, all his money was bleeding away from him, and he couldn't get money by the only way he knew how, which is to write. He suffered so much at the hands of the censorship. It was one of the reasons why he couldn't make the living he could have done as a writer, was because anything he said that was at all suggestive of having the wrong opinions as far as the Tsar was concerned was suppressed. So he was in a bad way anyway.
3 days later, on February the 10th, Pushkin died at the age of 37. There was a mass outpouring of grief.
Pushkin was much loved, strangely loved, not only by the literati, as you would expect, because he is an amazing genius, but also by the common people. All his verse preached kindness and generosity and humour and good humour. When they heard he was ill, he went round the town in a flash. They crowded the little part under a stone bridge, really, by the Moika, and there were so many of them, the Tsar was alarmed.
So muse, obey God's orders without fear, forget insults, expect no laurel wreaths, treat praise or slander with indifference, and never argue with a fool.
After Pushkin's death, Dantes was briefly imprisoned and later left the country. The Tsar paid Pushkin's debts, and Natalya remarried 3 years later.